17 days after the funeral, my son said, "We need to be practical." I looked at the porch light and the frost tracing the rail, then at the 6 suitcases lined up like a plan someone forgot to discuss. My daughter-in-law pointed at the stairs and said I would be more comfortable downstairs. I set 3 folders on the hall table and decided the rules would speak for me. I am not a man of speeches. I build things, or I used to, and I still think better with paper in my hands. The house learned my quiet a long time ago. It understands that stillness is not surrender. It is how you decide which nail actually needs the hammer. Mark carried a box toward the guest room and said again that word practical, like it could cover everything from grief to real estate. I did not argue. I opened the red folder labeled House. Inside were copies of the deed, the insurance, and the property tax receipts. I set them by the lamp so the light fell clean across the title. The name on the line was mine. I let the paper do what paper does when people cannot. Lisa started rearranging frames on the mantel, grouping them by what she called style. I watched our anniversary photo travel to a stack near the floor. She spoke about market appeal and clean lines. I nodded once, the way you acknowledge a weather report. The room was still a room I paid for. It would not change because someone said a phrase that sounded like a meeting agenda. "Dad, we want you safe," Mark said. He meant it, or meant part of it. He gestured toward the staircase, talked about knees and nightlights, and a brochure someone at church had given him. I breathed once, slow, then lifted the blue folder labeled Health. It held my latest clinic visit summary, a medication list, and a note from my doctor that said I remained independent in all activities. I did not wave it like a flag. I placed it next to the red folder. Grief makes time odd. The kitchen still smelled faintly of lemon oil from the casserole train that arrived and left. My Mary would have said, "Be kind, but draw lines." So I drew them where lines belong, on paper first, then in practice. I asked for the breakfast table to stay the breakfast table. I asked for evenings to be quiet after 9. I asked that family photographs remain where my eye expects them, because memory finds its footing on familiar corners. Lisa opened her mouth the way people do when they are ready to persuade. I lifted the 3rd folder, the plain manila one with keys written in pencil. It held a card with the names of everyone who had a key to this house. Mark, yes. Me, yes. The neighbor, Mrs. Carson, for emergencies. No one else. I slid a blank line under the card and said we could add a key for their daughter Emily, who had never once walked into a room like it belonged to her. That seemed to land softly. Sometimes a rule can also be a kindness. We ate sandwiches at the counter. The mayonnaise tasted sharper than usual. Mark explained that he had measured the upstairs bedroom and thought it would suit them while they helped me transition. He used the word transition like a hallway that leads somewhere inevitable. I wiped the crumbs into my palm and placed them in the trash, then said we would follow a process. If anyone moved rooms, we would write down who, why, and for how long. We would sign it, all of us. We would treat change plans like we treat money, with receipts. After lunch, I stepped out to the truck. The air had that thin winter brightness that makes everything sound closer. I opened the glove box and slid out a letter Mary had written the year we refinanced. She had a teacher's hand, even in quick notes. If anything happens, the letter said, remember the porch light, the bank, and the rule of 2 calls. The porch light tells you when to go home. The bank tells you what is yours. The 2 calls tell you the difference between worry and a plan. I stood there until the cold pressed through my jacket, then folded the letter back into its envelope. Inside, Lisa was on the phone with a place called Oak Ridge. She used a cheerful tone reserved for front desks and brunch reservations. I heard the words deposit and tour. I heard Saturday. I listened as far as manners allow, then walked to the calendar on the refrigerator. Saturday already had an entry in my careful block letters: hardware store, oil for the snowblower, watch battery at Henderson's. I circled it again, just to give the day company. Emily came by after school. She has her mother's way of entering a room like she is checking the weather, not judging it. She saw the stack of suitcases and looked at me. I said I was fine and meant it mostly. She offered to help sort the photo boxes. We sat on the rug and matched faces to names. When we came to the picture of Mark with a fishing pole, age 7, she smiled and said he was always trying to be the grown-up in the room. I said some rooms do not need a grown-up. They need a rule and a kind voice. That evening, Mark suggested a family meeting. We stood by the stairs. He spoke about plans, timelines, and professional assessments. I said we could have both plans and respect. I proposed that an independent nurse come by to evaluate my needs. We would all accept the results, whatever they were. That settled everyone for the moment. Lisa texted a number. We chose Thursday at 10. I slept in my bed with the porch light off for the first time in weeks. Mary hated leaving it on all night. She said it was like feeding the dark. I woke before the clock and made coffee the way she taught me. 2 scoops plus a half when company is in the house. The kitchen calmed itself around the sound of the kettle. Paper lay ready on the table, clipped in neat stacks. House, health, keys. A good morning begins with things in their places. The nurse arrived in a coat the color of quiet. She introduced herself as Miss Coleman and asked if she could speak with me alone. I watched my son's face gather itself for objection, then relax under the weight of manners. We sat in the den. She asked questions about bathing, walking, cooking, bills, hearing, and a dozen other small, important tasks that make up dignity. I answered plainly. She watched me stand, sit, reach for a book on the high shelf. She asked me to walk the hall and turn. She listened to my story and to the silence around the parts that still had heat. When she finished, she placed a simple form on the table. You are independent, she said. You may benefit from grab bars in the bathroom and a check-in call system, but you are oriented, mobile, and capable. I thanked her. She offered to email the report to me directly. I gave her my address and asked that she copy Mark as well. Paper is most honest when everyone reads the same line. Mark did not smile, but he did sit a little further back in his chair. He asked Ms. Coleman whether transitional support was still advisable. She said the support most needed was respect for the homeowner's decisions. Lisa stared at the carpet, tracing the pattern where the vacuum missed. After Ms. Coleman left, nobody spoke for a minute. The house made its familiar small sounds again. The refrigerator cycle, the baseboard ticking as it warmed. By afternoon, I had typed a 1-page document called house rules for this season. I kept it simple. First, bedrooms remain assigned as they have been. Second, photographs of family remain on the mantel and in the hallway gallery. Third, quiet hours from 9 to 7. Fourth, all changes to rooms or routines require a written note signed by everyone involved. Fifth, key holders are listed. Additions require a conversation and a signature. I printed 4 copies and set them by the lamp. I asked Emily to read it out loud because her voice keeps the edges soft. She read it like a pledge. Mark nodded at items 1 through 3 and asked to discuss number 1 again at month's end. I agreed to a review. A boundary can have a calendar without losing its strength. Lisa asked whether staging the living room for a potential appraisal counted as a change. I said yes because the room is where memory lives most days. She did not like that answer, but she wrote her name at the bottom of the page anyway. After dinner, I took Mark to the garage. We stood by the workbench Mary always joked was my second church. I opened a drawer and pulled out the envelope that holds the warranty, the loan amortization printout, and a copy of the Homeowners Association bylaws. I showed him the section on guests staying beyond 14 days requiring notice. I did not read it in a sheriff's voice. I set it on the bench for us both to see. He rubbed the back of his neck and said he had not known that part. I said that is why we read before we move furniture. The next morning, I stopped by the bank. The teller, Mr. Reed, wears a tie that always looks freshly chosen. I asked him to confirm the beneficiaries and to add a payable on death designation for Emily on a savings account set aside for house maintenance. He adjusted his glasses, clicked a few keys, and printed the forms. He did not ask why Emily and not Mark. He did not need to. He knows that a pod is not a drama. It is a plan for a roof that will someday leak. On my way home, I bought new batteries for the smoke detectors and a set of soft night lights for the hallway. Safety matters more than sentiment. If someone mentions practicality, you can point to the small lamps that keep an old man from missing a step at 3 in the morning. I put the receipt in the blue folder and wrote a note. Installed nightlights today. Sometimes the line you draw against being managed is also the line that keeps you upright. That afternoon, Oak Ridge called my phone instead of Lisa's. Someone must have updated the contact field, maybe by accident. The woman on the line asked to confirm a deposit under my name. I said I had not authorized any deposit and that any conversation about moving would include me first and would begin with a tour I scheduled. She apologized for the confusion and asked for a good email address. I gave it. Then I asked a question I already knew the answer to. Whose name is currently on the deposit placeholder? She read 2 names that were not mine. I thanked her and asked her to note the file. Homeowner not authorizing placement at this time. Polite sentences can be very strong. When I came into the kitchen, Mark was stirring a pot as if heat could hurry a solution. I set my keys in the dish and said I had spoken to Oak Ridge. He looked up too quickly. I told him any further calls about my living arrangements should come to me first. I spoke as if saying please. He said he only wanted to help. I said I could accept help better when consent led the conversation. That evening, we walked through the house with a yellow pad and made a list of things to fix. The list quieted everyone. A draft under the back door. a loose banister screw that had waited too long, a light that flickered over the sink. We set a Saturday plan that included Henderson's hardware, a stop by the church rummage sale, and a visit to Mrs. Carson because she knows the neighborhood history better than the internet. Before bed, I placed the glove box letter in the top drawer of the nightstand. I turned off the porch light and stood in the soft dark a moment longer than usual. I thought of Mary's handwriting and the porch she loved because it framed the world without pushing anyone into it. Grief does not like rules, but it lives easier beside them. I pulled the covers up and told myself a sentence that has carried me through harder winters. Natural consequences, applied gently, are a kind of love. The next morning, I printed a small sign for the hall closet where the photo boxes live. It said Family Archive. Ask before moving. Lisa saw it and bit her lip, then nodded. Emily snapped a picture and set it as a reminder on her phone. Mark carried 2 suitcases back to the garage without being asked. The house breathed. By late afternoon, the nurse's report arrived by email. I read it once, then again more slowly. Mark read it after me. He agreed to cancel Saturday's tour. I thanked him and suggested we take the same drive anyway, but to Henderson's, not Oak Ridge. We could buy the grab bars and install them together. He said that sounded good. He meant it this time. A line, once drawn, can become a path if you leave space for someone to walk beside you. Saturday came with a pale sun and a road salted white at the edges. We drove to Henderson's as planned. The bell over the door chimed the same way it did when Mark was 7 and saved his allowance for a pocket knife he was not old enough to keep. The owner still remembered our name. He measured the tub walls with his eyes, sold us 2 grab bars, and threw in a pack of wall anchors because he said he liked the way a father and son looked when they were choosing safety instead of arguments. Back home, Mark held the level while I drove the screws. He is strong, but he rushes. I said, slow is accurate. He kept the bubble steady, and the bar seated cleanly. We did the second one faster and better, which is the reward patience gives. When we finished, he ran the water and tugged the bar like a tester in a factory. It didn't budge. After lunch, a white sedan eased to the curb. A woman stepped out with a clipboard and a calm face you'd trust with your spare key. Miss Patel, HOA manager, she said. I had called the office yesterday and asked for clarification about long-term guests. She had offered to stop by, walk through the policy, and save us all the trouble of guessing. We sat at the kitchen table, and she set the bylaws between us like a measured bridge. She explained the 14-day rule, the notice requirement, and the way exceptions are handled when families enter difficult seasons. She said the rule was not written to break families apart. It was written to make neighbors' lives predictable. Mark asked whether he and Lisa could stay upstairs, just for a while, if they were on the lease. Mrs. Patel smiled the way a teacher does when a student has asked the right-wrong question. There is no lease, she said. There is an owner. The owner may host guests. Long-term arrangements require paperwork. Paperwork begins with consent. Nobody raised their voice. Ms. Patel helped us draft a notice that said Mark and Lisa would be guests for the next 2 weeks, subject to review. She wrote in the margin that the upstairs remains assigned as the homeowner's bedroom. We all initialed and dated the page. She left a copy for the file and another for my House folder. The refrigerator hummed its approval. Lisa asked to stage the living room, just a little. I said we could try one shelf and see how it felt. She moved 2 frames, then moved them back. She caught herself smiling and said the house looked better with its own face. I said most houses do. The mantel stayed our mantel. The room breathed out. That evening, Emily spread a blanket on the floor and drew floor plans for her dorm. She asked if she could keep a spare key because she liked to study at the dining table where the light was kind. I wrote her name on the card and gave her the brass key with the small nick on the edge. Ask before you cook with the big pan, I said, and she laughed. Rules can be small and still be tender. Sunday brought church, the quiet row we've sat in for decades, and the hymn Mary loved because it walked instead of ran. After the service, a neighbor named Alvarez stopped by the porch. He asked gently if I still intended to sell the old drill press. It had lived in my garage longer than some relationships survive. I told him I would sell it to the right hands with the condition he showed me the first project that came off it. He said he would build a cedar chest for his granddaughter. We shook on a price that honored both history and present need. He counted the bills into my palm and wrote cedar chest in the memo line of the receipt. Natural consequences sometimes sound like a chuckle. Monday's mail held 2 envelopes that mattered. The first was from Oak Ridge. Inside was a polite note acknowledging my call, confirming no placement would proceed without my written consent, and listing the deposit as third-party pending, no authorization. The second was Ms. Coleman's formal assessment with the independent box checked and 3 lines under recommendations that we had already met. Grab bars, nightlights, and a check-in call. I placed both documents in the blue health folder. Paper is a warm animal when it tells the truth on your side. Mark asked if we could talk after dinner. He stood by the sink, towel in his hands, future in his eyes. I thought I was doing what Dad would want, he said, and then he realized I was the dad in front of him. He looked smaller and more honest. I miss Mom, he said next, because grief often hides inside logistics. I set the towel down and said the kitchen belonged to both states of mind, missing and making. We washed the last plate in a silence that did not punish anyone. We built a schedule that respected the house and our peace. Monday through Friday, Mark and Lisa would help with groceries, the basement boxes, and the winterizing tasks I no longer wanted to climb ladders for. Evenings after 9 would be quiet. Weekends were mine to keep, with invitations offered, not assigned. In 2 weeks, we would review, not to corner anyone, but to take a new measure. A rule that cannot be reviewed is a wall. A rule that can meet again is a gate. On Tuesday, Ms. Patel emailed a template for an inventory log. I printed it and set it on the dining table. We listed the contents of the upstairs room piece by piece. My wedding suit stayed. Mary's quilts stayed. The oak dresser stayed, with the bottom left drawer reserved for Emily's notebooks. Lisa suggested a storage bin for seasonal items. I said yes, as long as the bin lived in the hall closet labeled Family Archive. She placed a label on the bin in neat, careful print, and for the first time I saw her as someone with love and a plan instead of a plan pretending to be love. Midweek brought a small test. A real estate flyer appeared in the mailbox with a handwritten line. We have buyers waiting. Mark held it a second too long. I watched his face decide and then placed the paper in the recycling bin without comment. That mattered more than he knew. He chose the rules over the rush. The house noticed. So did I. Emily found the old battery drawer and organized it by type. She set up a check-in reminder on her phone for mornings and evenings. A little chime that says, "I'm awake," and "I'm home." She asked if that felt like control. I told her it felt like love with a clock. Some days, love needs a timestamp, she said. I wrote the sentence in my notes folder because Mary used to say the same thing with different words. By Friday, the upstairs felt like mine again, even with the suitcases in the hall. The grab bars gleamed. The nightlights did their small job. I replaced the porch bulb with a warm one that looked like morning even when it was past dinner. I labeled a new folder Emergencies and tucked inside it a copy of the nurse's report, the HOA notice, and a short list of numbers: bank, clinic, Emily, Mark, church office, Miss Patel. The list fit on one page. So do most things when you cut away the noise. That night, the furnace made a sound like a pebble in a shoe. I wrote it down and called Henderson's. "Tomorrow," the man said. 9 sharp. Mark overheard and said he'd meet the tech, so I wouldn't have to stand in the cold. "Thank you," I said. Gratitude is also a rule. You keep it where everyone can reach it. Saturday morning, the tech replaced a small igniter and showed Mark how to read the service panel lights. I stood back and watched my son learn a simple thing that keeps a house honest. He handled the invoice and tucked the receipt in the house folder without being told. When the truck pulled away, he turned to me with the look of a boy who finally fixed the bike chain that had kept slipping. "I want to do this right," he said. "I don't want to be the kind of help that feels like taking." We took a drive after lunch, not because we had errands, but because the road in winter tells you the difference between alone and accompanied. We passed Oak Ridge and did not turn in. We passed the hardware store and waved. We passed the lake where Mary liked to sit with her book while I fell asleep on the bench, my hat over my face. Mark asked if he could keep an upstairs room for the next month while they looked for a place closer to his work. I said yes, on paper, with dates, and with the understanding that home is not a general noun. It is a proper one, with an address and a deed. When we came back, Lisa had arranged a small bouquet on the dining table. She had placed our anniversary photo beside it. "It belongs here," she said, and her voice found the room's key. She apologized for deciding faster than she listened. I apologized for letting paper speak when my voice could have gone first. We smiled like people who have discovered the shape of their own pride and put softer edges on it. Sunday afternoon, Mr. Alvarez returned with the cedar chest, raw wood sanded to a future. He set it in the garage, ran his hand along the lid, and said he would finish it with oil after the winter. He told me he had used the old drill press for the dowel joints. "Your machine knew what to do," he said. I laughed. Machines learn by being used. People do too. That evening, I wrote a letter I had been avoiding. Not to Mark, to myself. I wrote that grief and control often trade coats. I wrote that independence is not a fortress. It is a garden with a fence and a gate that opens when you ask. I wrote that I loved my son, and I loved my wife, and I loved the house that held both of their names inside mine many times over. I set the letter in the notes folder, then moved it to the nightstand. Some papers belong near the lamp. In the second week, the rhythm held. Emily's check-in chime sounded like a bell in a small town square. Lisa copied down a recipe from Mary's card file and asked if she could make it Wednesday. I said yes and stood in the doorway while the kitchen remembered a dance. Mark fixed the loose banister screw, slower this time, steady, level bubble calm. We canceled the extra suitcases and kept only the one with winter clothes. The hallway felt less like a terminal and more like a home again. On review day, we sat with Ms. Patel's notice, the nurse's report, and our house rules. We signed a new 2-week guest form with a note that Mark and Lisa were searching for nearby housing. We adjusted the quiet hours to begin at 10 on Friday nights because movies should not end with scolding. We added ask before moving labels to 2 more closets. We laughed once. Laughter is what rules sound like when they meet kindness. That night, I stood at the door with the porch light off, the way Mary preferred. The cold carried sound. A fox in the brush, a distant train, a neighbor testing a snowblower. I said a small thank you to the dark and another to the rules. Then I said the sentence that has carried me every time the world thought it could manage me better than I could manage myself. Natural consequences, applied gently. I locked the door, set the keys in the dish, and went to bed. In the morning, Emily poured coffee and handed me a small envelope with her careful print on the front. Inside was a photo she had taken of the mantel with the flowers and the anniversary picture. On the back she had written, "Steady is a kind of love." I placed it behind Mary's letter in the nightstand. The porch light slept. The house knew our names. And the day started not with a fight, but with a plan that fit in our hands.